Alfred Coke served 2 full tours in Vietnam, first as the company commander of a combat infantry unit, and the second as a military advisor. Of those 730 days in Vietnam, he estimates that he received enemy fire on 400 of them. He was wounded multiple times, and he has both the scars and the decorations to prove it. The lessons he learned leading men into combat informed his second career as a leadership consultant. But outside of that specific context, he never really opened up about what he did and saw and endured in Vietnam. That is, until he struck up an unlikely friendship with Allan Danroth, an industrial engineer from Canada, nearly 3 decades his junior. Why, after all those decades, did Al Coke unearth his long-buried memories and feelings with Allan Danroth? Because Allan Danroth wanted to listen.
It's certainly been impactful for me, and there's been more than a few times where I'm like thinking to myself, why me? And I've even asked him, and he just shrugs it off and says, well, you're my buddy and you seem interested.
In this episode, we bring you an inspiring story of friendship and the healing power of just being interested. Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict more than 50 years later. This is episode 74, The Hero in Your Midst. Just a quick warning, this episode does contain some colorful language. Nothing you haven't heard before, especially if you've spent any amount of time around military people, but we thought you should know up front. Allan Danroth is an engineer and a business executive. If you totaled up all of his experience as a documentarian or a memoirist, you'd get exactly 0. And yet, Allan has become those things for Alfred Coke, a retired Army lieutenant colonel who went on to earn 3 master's degrees and a PhD. Dr. Coke participated in 7 campaigns in Vietnam, earning 2 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars, 1 with a V for Valor, a Combat Infantry Badge, and an Expert Infantry Badge, along with his Aircrew Wings and Parachutist Wings, his Expert Marksmanship Badge for multiple weapons, Jungle Expert Badge, and Army Staff Badge. He's lost count of the close calls he experienced during his 2 years of combat, but he survived 3 aircraft crashes with fatalities, including being shot down in Cambodia. The stories of Al Coke's combat experience could fill several volumes of a book, and that's just 2 years out of 20 in the Army. Dr. Coke also served in Berlin during the Cold War, in Korea, and at the Pentagon. He's written 2 books, but neither of them describe his combat experience. Those memories were bottled up and stowed away for decades, while Dr. Coke went about the business of building a happy, successful life. He never gave any thought to how those experiences affected him deep down, until Allan Danroth started asking questions. Together, they have recorded more than 10 hours of audio, an oral history of Dr. Coke's life that includes his 2 tours in Vietnam. Through that process, Dr. Coke has begun to come to terms for the first time with his own trauma. Allan Danroth joined me via Zoom from his home in Edmonton, Alberta. I asked him how a Canadian engineer about my age becomes the close confidant and sort of biographer, really, to a highly decorated Vietnam combat veteran from the U.S. Army.
Yeah, it all just sort of happened out of the blue. So, Dr. Coke was doing, after he left the military, he was doing a business consulting practice using his experiences from the military around strategic planning. And he had a lot of clients in Canada. And I had just taken over a big industrial plant, a pulp mill out in Atlantic Canada, and he had just concluded a bunch of work out there. And some people that I was working with knew him from his prior engagements, and so he came out to help us. It was it was a really big change situation. We had a lot of issues trying to get this plant back up and running, and working with the union, and he really helped, and we just hit it off, and we just formed this friendship, and that was in 2007, 2006. So I was about 35 years old, 36 years old, and he had been retired from the military, and we just hit it off. And then, we stayed together for, in touch ever since then. So it's been whatever, 15, 16 years now. And I would go back and see him at his home in Virginia every year.
Later, Allan had taken a job with a large cannabis company where he was responsible for working with Canadian combat veterans suffering from PTSD.
And I think that experience and me talking about that really started to warm him up, if you will, to the concept of his personal experiences and the things he went through and how it made him feel, and really, PTSD. So I had gone out there for his 80th birthday, and was 2021. We would just sit. He has this magnificent home and this beautiful porch, and it's a late summer evening, and it's our favorite place. We just sit out there, and we'll sip a bourbon and just talk. And he started to open up, and he started to get, he had always talked about a little bit about Vietnam, but it was always in the context of, here's some leadership experiences that I learned while I was in the military, and here's how you can apply it in your business. And it was sort of that kind of a conversation. And then we were just sitting out there one night, and it was quiet, and we were talking, and then I just asked him, a little more pointedly about, I'd heard some of his stories, but I really wanted to understand, like, how did you not come back with PTSD? How are you so well adjusted? And sitting there asking that question just started to open him up over the coming days, and then in our visits after.
And is it your sense that this was the first time since the war that he had opened up like that?
Yeah, I'm really close with his wife as well. The three of us we've just really formed this incredible friendship. And she remarked, and he would remark that a lot of the stuff he was telling me and the stories he was telling me, he had never told anyone, and even his kids. And that was the point where I said to him, look, you need to talk about this, not just to me. First off, I think you need to talk to a professional. And secondly, you need to talk to your kids and your grandkids about this. I just think it's hard sometimes to open up to your family that way. But he just kept opening up. And at some point I said, he's always been a writer, and he's written his memoirs, and he's given me a copy, and he's started in this late stage of his life to document things. But I said, we need an oral history of this. His experience, I think, is probably not unlike a lot of other combat guys that were over there. He did 2 full tours, so 730 days. And I asked him at one point how many times, he had been shot at. And he laughed, and he said, I couldn't tell you. And I said, okay, well, how many days have you been shot at? And he said, shoot, probably 400. And I was stunned. I was stunned at like that concept, that volume. He started to talk about all of these different things, and then he tied it into wanting to go and look at a couple of names on the wall and an audio history of this. And then the other thing that happened out of that, talking about that, was he let me know that he had never been to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And
He
I was
lives in
just stuck.
Virginia.
And he lives in Virginia, and he worked at the Pentagon. He lived in DC, I think, for a decade.
Wow.
So I was like, I just remember thinking, you haven't been? And he said, no. And I said, well, we gotta, like, if you want to go, I don't, it's your choice, but if you want to go, I'll go with you. And because he's getting a little bit older, and also it's just, it can be quite traumatic, I think, to go by yourself. And then he came back to me after a while. I can't remember if it was weeks or months, but he came back to me and he asked me if I'd come back out again and go with him there, take him there. And that's what we did. And so we did that the spring in March of 24. But it was interesting when we got there. It was emotional. It was yeah, it's something I'll never forget. Something I'll never forget.
It was a long time coming, right? So it was a lot of pent up emotion.
Yeah.
Was his
Yeah.
wife with you, or was it just you two guys?
No, it's just the two of us.
Uh-huh.
And one of the comments he made, we were walking away and he said, I thought there'd be more veterans there. And I said, well, let's be honest, we're a little bit late. Most of the veterans didn't wait until they were 82 to come and see the wall. And he said, yeah, but that was he acknowledged that his way of dealing with his PTSD and realizing he's had it this whole time was to immerse himself in his work. As he started to recognize that there was some trauma with what he did, and as he, maybe started to he's so humble, but maybe started to recognize a little bit that, he really did, has led an extraordinary life. And we just felt like I kept saying to him, you got to get this down. We got to record this. We got to find somebody. And of course, he didn't really want to talk to anybody else. And so then finally, I just said, look, can we do a recording like a podcast? He didn't even know what a podcast was. So I explained to him what podcasts were, how they worked. And he's like, do we have to go to a studio? And I'm like, no, we could get pretty good quality just sitting in your back porch. And then I left one of my last trips there, and then he called me up and again he asked me to, take him to the wall, and he said I want to do our recordings. And he kept talking about this, and so then my preparation for that, I've never done this. Been interviewed a few times before, but I've never been on the other side, that's for sure. And I listened to a few podcasts, and you were gracious enough to talk to me and give me some guidance. And I talked to a few other people and just read some things, some do's and don'ts. And I just finally thought, I'm not a professional, and we're just going to let this happen organically. And that's what we did. And now, we've got a lot of hours. I think we've got about 10 hours of this, and he says there's even more stories, and what we do with it, we're not really sure. This, neither of us are podcasters, that's for sure. But the biggest thing for me was to get this down for his kids. He's got 4 kids, and for his grandkids, and just when he goes, to have that history and just have that there for the family so that they understand the kind of man he was and the things that he did.
And what's his wife's name?
And
did you talk to Anne about any of this?
I did not. And he got very involved in this project, and the two of us are, I think, world-class talkers, and he just, uh, for me, anyways, I just kept thinking, boy, this stuff is gold. The stuff that just keeps coming out, like there's more and more and more. And so, by the time we, did the interviews, did the trip, came back, did the interviews, and I had to go the next day, there just wasn't enough time to talk to Anne. But he wants me to come back and do some more recordings, and I'm happy to do that. And I'm certainly hoping that I'll be able to talk to her a little bit as well.
Yeah, well, let me know if you do, because I'd be very interested in her perspective on how this friendship and this opening up has changed him in her eyes.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I know she would too. It's she's remarked more than a few times when we first started hanging out, you know, she used to say, I don't know why, you know, the universe put you two together, but it's for a reason. She would say that he's never talked about this stuff, very little to her. And the one thing that's been really interesting, since he turned, around his 80th birthday, he's 82 now, is he's gotten emotional, and he's talked about things that he never talked about before. And sometimes he'll get quite emotional. All the years I've hung out with him, these last few trips are the first time I've ever seen him cry, and he apologized. And I just kept telling him, don't apologize. I'm happy to be here and listen. And
it really is a gift, right? I mean, without getting too esoteric, we're 99.5% identical genetically to chimpanzees. So how different can we be from each other, right? The only thing that makes you Allan Danroth and me Michael Crone is our stories. We're like walking bags of narratives, right? Other than that, we are almost exactly identical. So when somebody opens up that bag and starts sharing their stories, like what more precious gift can there be?
Yeah. That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. That's a really... The stories define us, I guess, right?
Yeah. After a short break, we'll hear some of the audio that Allan has recorded so far with Dr. Coke. Stick around. The Registry is an online community created by VVMF that connects veterans of the Vietnam War era with each other. By signing up for the Registry, you can upload and share stories and images, connect with others who served during the Vietnam era, and connect your service with people you knew whose names are now on the wall. Join the community and preserve your legacy or a family member's by signing up today at vvmf.org/registry.
Hi, I'm Anne Margaret. I went to Vietnam to entertain the troops in 1966 and 1968. My guys, my gentlemen, if you lived through the Vietnam War era, you know the impact that the war had. But today, we are in danger of history being lost. Current generations know very little about the war or the people who served. As more of our Vietnam vets pass away each day, their stories are being lost to history. Together, we can change that. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is the organization that built the wall. It works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. Let's help keep the promise that the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
Here's Allan Danroth with Dr. Alfred Coke.
So you go there, and in the totality of your time there, you end up with 2 Purple Hearts and 3 Bronze Stars and a number of Vietnamese medals. But go back to the start. You show up, you leave Alaska, You land there, and just kind of walk through like sort of what you were doing and what your kind of daily routine was.
They threw us on due snares and sent us up to the 25th Division, the ones that were going to the 25th Division. And I'm thinking, shit, we could get ambushed along the way here because this is bad country here between here and Coochie Base Camp. But we got there. They assigned us to the brigade that we were going to be in. So we go meet the adjutant. He said, "Why are you guys late?" I told you that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. They screwed it up in Panama, I guess.
Yeah.
We all knew why the hell we were late. So the brigade commander lined us all up. There were probably like a dozen of us. Said, "Okay, who wants to be a company commander?" Me. We raised our hand if you wanted to be a company commander. Well, there were a whole bunch of guys that just didn't raise their hand. He said, "Okay, you guys that want to be company commanders, you'll get your time. I can't promise you will, but you'll get your time." So they assigned me to a battalion, and I was the S3 Air. That's operations that deals with aircraft and bombs and that kind of sort of stuff. Coordinates with the Air Force and so forth. And you got flight pay, $110 a month. That ain't bad.
It ain't bad.
No. So I was the S3 Air. And while I was the S3 Air, we had some incidents where like my S3 got wounded and in the hospital. So I ran the show. I was the S3. I was the operations guy. And I guess I must have impressed the battalion commander because at some point in time he called me in one night. I was out in the field. He called me and I went, "Oh shit, what's all this about?" And I said, "Can it wait till tomorrow?" And they went, "Fuck no, get your ass in here. The battalion commander wants to talk to you." So, okay, I'm on my way. So I got a chopper and went in, and he said, "Company commander of Company B, Roger Donlin, decides he doesn't, not Roger, Roger Pierce. Roger Pierce decided he doesn't want to be the company commander anymore, and you're going to be the new company commander for B. Any questions? Move out." just like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So the next morning I took a chopper out to Company B and picked up and became a company commander. So, but we had several incidents, and the reason my S3 was in the hospital was a freak accident. We'd been out on an operation and we came in and we had a hooch, and it was just a shed kind of thing, and they had beer and stuff like that. And so we were sitting around the table. This other guy and I were sitting at this table having a beer, and the brigade commander and our battalion commander and our operations guy were all three sitting at the table next to us, just a little round table. And all of a sudden there was a bang, and a bullet came through the wall right here by me, hit the guy in the leg under the table, splattered, knocked all three of them flat back. I mean, it's like a hammer had hit them.
Wow.
A bullet spattered, and the shrapnel hit all three of them. So that put my battalion commander out of operation. He was ready to leave in a week.
Now this was an enemy bullet.
This was a friendly bullet.
This was friendly bullet.
Yeah.
This was friendly fire.
This was a friendly bullet. My battalion commander was to leave in a week, so his loss was no problem. My S3 was fairly new there, and he was a good guy. He was an ex-Special Forces guy, and I ran into him a couple times later, and he was a good guy. Took him out, so they're all in the hospital. What the shit? What had happened was a guard mount was forming up outside to go on guard duty on the perimeter. This was back at base camp. And a kid set his rifle down, bang, like that. When the stock hit the ground, it fired.
Jeez.
The bullet came through the side wall of the building and knocked out three people. So we get a new battalion commander. He's got a Distinguished Service Cross from Korea. He's an old guy. He doesn't like to fly. He's scared shitless of flying. And he and I hit it off. And he said, "Okay, you've got to do S3 duties while Major Boyd's in the hospital." Okay, that's fine with me. I know how to do that. So I would fly, and he would stay on the ground. So I would fly on all the operations, and he would be on the ground. Not necessarily at the operations level, but so I got my wings there. I got good opportunity because he trusted me and he believed in me. So when I got wounded the first time, he was going to send me off to a camp up in North where his brother runs Special Forces camp. His brother was head of Special Forces. He was a full colonel, and James K. Ladd was a lieutenant colonel. And I told him I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay with the battalion and do something.
So you got wounded the first time.
Yeah.
What happened?
Shot through the leg.
Right there.
Huh?
Out on patrol?
We were on an operation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
Take your time.
it's a straight story. I don't know why I'm getting emotional about it.
Well, partly because you didn't talk about this for a long time.
We were doing an air mobile, my company.
Yeah.
We had about 70 people. We were down. I mean, we had taken casualties out the wazoo. Most of them wounded. Nobody had been killed, but man, the wounded were all over the place. So we did an air mobile. Ran into a rainstorm. Had to sit down on a rice paddy dike. So we sat down in the helicopters. So that put us like 2 hours late till this thunder thing blew over. So we were late moving. So that meant we were not going to make our objective by the time frame. So it's twilight. My troops are spread out all over the place. My command group, my lieutenants, I called them to say, okay, we need to parlay here because we're not going to make our objective by dark because it's dark. I mean, it's twilight.
Right.
So we're standing on a dike and we all squat down, and I got my flashlight. And you got the filters over your flashlight, but you cover them anyway. So we're down like this looking at the map, and there's two, I don't remember this, I'll have to check my notes. There were 2 or 3 of my platoon leaders with me there. My medic was standing right nearby. My radio operator was standing behind me. And we're all kneeling down around the maps. And we're talking about where we're going to put 1st Platoon, 2nd Platoon, 3rd Platoon. And as I got like this, I looked up like that and I saw twinkling lights coming toward us. Fuck, I knew what that was. So what it was is we had not cleared enough territory. My troops had we just crossed a rice paddy pond or canal. So they had not gotten far enough yet, and we were too close to the front. And I saw what was happening, and I jumped, spun to the right, and dove, took a big flying leap like Batman, like boom, like this. And he caught me in midair, shot me through the leg. One bullet went through my trousers, went through my set of maps that I had in my pants pocket, but never touched me.
Man.
Yeah, yeah. I wish I had those maps, but I gave those maps to Lutsenov, my executive officer, when he took the company while I was incapacitated. But I dove for cover, and my medic got hit. My radio operator didn't get hit, but he got his antenna shut off the radio. All of the other officers got wounded. Some of them really bad. All evacuated because they were laying on the dike and you could hear the bullets thumping them. So we evacuated them, and I didn't have any other officers. So I put a
No. You want to take a break? No.
I took my belt off and put it around my leg.
Yeah.
Because I was bleeding.
Yeah.
I didn't know how bad, but I could feel a lot of flesh going back there.
Yeah.
Shit. So I told the battalion commander, I'm not going to be evacuated. So I stayed there until about midnight, and I was hurting so bad because we were down in rice paddy water.
Ugh.
And that's dangerous because you can get terrible infections.
Yeah.
And so I was starting to really hurt. I mean, shot in the fucking leg,
Yeah.
So one of my sergeants called the battalion and said, you got to get him out of here. So instead of going out by dust off, the battalion commander sent his helicopter in and picked me up. And I remember riding out. I was sitting sideways in the door with my legs straight out like that because I couldn't bend it with a strap around my leg. And my company the next day found the village where this shit took place.
Yeah.
There was a couple of structures close by.
Yeah.
And they burned that so much to the ground. Like, you don't do that to our company commander. So anyway, but it made the battalion news there that night, and I had a whole welcoming party there to meet me when I got to the medic, and he dressed my wound, and they put me in the hospital, the 125th VAC hospital, and I stayed there for, I don't remember, 3 or 4 days maybe. And funny incident happened. I hated shots. I've hated shots my entire life. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about.
We've had this discussion on other health matters.
Yes, we have. Well,
like, get the damn shot.
So I knew I was going to get shots. I knew I was going to get them because, man, they pump you full of stuff when you're in a place like that with all that stuff that can happen to you. Of course, I'd been laying out in a rice paddy for like 4 or 5 hours in the water.
Yeah.
So they were real concerned about infection. So I figured out what time the male nurse came to give me my shots in the morning. So one morning I said, I ain't taking a fucking shot this morning. It's not going to happen. So I get up, hobble out to the latrine on my crutches, and hide in the latrine. I'm a captain. Like, you got to be kidding me. So I stayed there about 3 or 4 hours. Sitting in the crapper.
Oh, that's gonna stink.
So
that's terrible.
So I get ready. I said, well, he's got to make the rounds now. He can't be there for 3 or 4 hours. So I said, okay, time to go back to my bed. So I hobbled back to my bed, and there was his cart at the foot of my bed. He said, well, I see you've been ducking out. Bam.
That's funny.
Oh shit.
So that's Purple Heart 1.
Yeah.
Now the Bronze Stars are separate from that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Were they in the first tour or the second tour?
I got 1 Bronze Star for my tour of duty for first tour.
For the first tour.
Then I got a 2nd Bronze Star for my tour of duty for my second tour.
Right.
And then I got a Bronze Star with V for an action that occurred when I was an advisor.
Right.
It was a Silver Star kicked down to a Bronze Star.
The Silver Star kicked down to a Bronze Star.
Yeah, that happened all the time.
That was politics.
The guy who overflew the operation,
he got a Silver Star.
He got the Silver Star, and he later became a general. He was the aviation commander. He never set foot on the ground. He never did anything except flew around in his helicopter.
Can we say his name?
I don't know if you... Yeah, well...
Maybe not.
When we come back, we'll finish up my conversation with Allan Danroth. Stick around. Let's talk about the wall for a minute. It is widely considered to be the memorial that changed memorials forever. Its design invites a level of engagement, of introspection, of reverence that no fountain, no statue of a cannon or a man on a horse could ever match. The volunteers who work there often talk about wall magic, that unexpected, often spiritual connection or discovery that happens when you visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's one of the reasons why the wall's design has inspired so many other memorials around the world. Of course, there is one little problem with the wall's design. 140 panels of polished black granite aren't exactly portable. So, unless you can get yourself to Washington, D.C., how are you supposed to experience wall magic for yourself? Well, guess what? We already thought of that. In 1996, VVMF unveiled an exact replica of the wall that could be packed into an 18-wheeler and hauled to cities and towns all across America. Since then, the wall that heals has been displayed in nearly 700 communities throughout the nation, spreading the healing legacy of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to millions of visitors. Sure, there are other versions of the wall that travel around the country, but the wall that heals is the only one that is an exact replica of the one in Washington, created and maintained by the same organization that built the wall in the first place. And not only that, the wall that heals is accompanied and curated by VVMF employees who work with host communities to ensure that the experience is as close as possible to the real thing. And that includes wall magic. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out episode 15 of this podcast to learn what happens to people's hearts when this traveling exhibit rolls into a real-life American community. The Wall That Heals and the mobile education center that travels with it will be in Robertsdale, Alabama, May 9 through 12, and Waynesville, Missouri, May 16 through 19. To see the rest of this year's tour schedule and to learn how you can bring the Wall That Heals to your town, visit vvmf.org. And now the rest of my conversation with Allan Danroth.
I'll never forget where we were when I asked him that question about just how many days had you been shot at? And I kind of, I chuckle here, but not because it's humorous, obviously, but just because I'm just so gobsmacked.
Right.
Like 400 days. And then in typical Coke fashion, he's like, sometimes there's just a bullet going past your head, just some farmer trying to get lucky. I just remember thinking to myself, oh my God. If
I had one day where a bullet whizzed past me because a farmer was trying to get lucky, that I would dine out on that for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? That would be
I've known a lot of cops. Again, I've got family members that are police officers, and
yeah,
like certainly in Canada 20, 30 years ago, it was not common for a cop to ever pull his gun. Like there would be police officers that would go through their entire career and not pull their gun. And I know cops that have, been in really heated situations and pulled their gun and not discharged their gun or had anything discharged at them, but they PTSD, and let alone when a gun gets discharged, PTSD. And I just remember thinking, man, like people are off, on PTSD because a gun got discharged in their direction once or maybe twice, but it's like 400 days, right? Like probably over 1,000 times. I just remember thinking, I looked at him, I laughed. I looked at him, it was late at night. We'd had more than a few bourbons, and I laughed. And I said, yeah, this is time for bed, but I said, I'm pretty sure you got PTSD. I just remember wrapping it up that way. The next day over breakfast, and afternoon coffee and stuff, he was like, I've been thinking about that. Maybe I do have that. So it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, so that leads to my next question, which is, you'd mentioned that you suggested that he speak with a professional. So what do you think is his relationship to his own PTSD? Is the recording, the catharsis that you think, will that be sufficient? What does he think?
Yeah, he's an incredibly bright man. He has a doctorate degree in org design, and he's well read. He's just a very intelligent, thinking human, and he did go and talk to someone, and he said it really helped. And as we talked about it, and this is a very similar comment that the folks that I interacted with that had gone to Afghanistan had made at different times, which is, it wasn't the fight, the engagement, the killing, if you will, with the enemy that was the problem. It was when the people around you got killed. And there was a couple of instances that, and one in particular that really shook him. And those were the ones that he really, really struggled with, that he felt responsible for and felt like he could have done more. And as these things go, I'm sure there was survivor guilt and a few other things that kick in. But he felt good after visiting the counselor and working through the veterans branch down there. But to your point, these recordings were really helpful for him. Just everything that came out in these recordings was just there. I had no script. I had no note.
It is remarkable that this man, after all this time, chose you to open up to. And it is remarkable that you've gotten him to talk with a professional about it. Because, he would never have considered that maybe he was carrying around some stuff that he needed to let go of or just acknowledge and deal with. He might not have ever gotten to that point. And what you're saying is it has helped him. He is better.
Yeah.
He's better because he shared it, because he opened up. And, so many guys never get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thanks for saying that. And it's definitely, it's certainly been impactful for me. And there's more than a few times where I'm like, why? Thinking to myself, why me? And I've even asked him, once or twice, like, why are you? And he just shrugs it off and says, well, you're my buddy and you seem interested. And there's just not a lot of time left for people to be interested.
That's right.
I mean, like most 82-year-old men, he's slowing down and as he likes to put it, he's been in a few helicopter crashes and he's been shot at a few times and banged up and beat up. And that, factors even more into the slowing down. Right. And we got to try to capture these stories while we can. So be curious. And the stories are out there. Like you said, there's a vet in every neighborhood.
It's pretty unusual, I found, for a Vietnam veteran to open up about his experience to anyone but another Vietnam veteran, or maybe a therapist. I consider it a small miracle when one of them agrees to share his experience with me, and I do this for a living. But if Allan Danroth can do it, maybe you can too. If you have a close relationship with a Vietnam veteran, consider inviting him or her to talk with you about the war, about coming home, about whatever he or she is comfortable sharing. Don't push too hard. Just be a buddy and seem interested. You might be surprised how much healing starts with listening. Just listen. Big thanks to Allan and Dr. Coke for letting us share their stories with you. With their permission, we'll try to bring you more of Dr. Coke's stories in future episodes. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. See you then.